do you think that the likes of Richard Tice could have an influence in the outcome of the next national poll?
Oh, yes, I think the emphasis there is on influence. What we do know is that in general elections, small parties just do not perform well because everybody is focused on what the two big parties are doing, and they're focused not so much on which one of those they want, but on which one of those they don't want. And they fear that if they give their vote to a small party, and we saw this even with the mighty SDP in the 1980s, once it comes to a general election, people don't want to risk a vote for a small party in case the wrong big party gets in. But your word was influence. And there, I think all you have to do is look at what the Brexit Party did in 2019, when we absolutely swept the board at the European elections, said we were going to field candidates in every seat, managed to thoroughly put the wind up the Conservative Party so that Theresa May had to go. Boris came in pledging he would get Brexit done, and the general election was fought on that. Now, that only happened because sufficient pressure was put on the Conservatives to know that if they did not get Brexit done, then they were actually going to lose support from their own members. So influence, yes. Make any impact electorally, no.
Could this rivalry from smaller right-wing parties backfire and hand the keys of number 10, Anne, to Keir Starmer, particularly in those red wall seats?
Well, I think, as I say, come a general election, people aren't going to vote for the smaller parties, be they left, right or anything else. They're going to make a choice between the two big parties. But we've got 2 years before that. And in the course of that 2 years, we've got local elections, we've got county elections, we've got all manner of electoral tests. And if the little parties start doing extremely well in those, that, as I say, is what influences the bigger parties to start taking seriously public opinion, which they don't. I mean, when they're in there, and particularly when you've got a party with an enormous majority, it doesn't have to listen to public opinion unless the public speaks so loudly that it begins to take notice, and that's what we've got to do.
Sir Vince Cable, in 2010, your party, the Liberal Democrats, had significant influence in the outcome of the general election. It took a couple of days of negotiation between Nick Clegg and David Cameron, but in the end, the Lib Dems were kingmakers in a hung parliament.
Well, it could happen again. As Anne said, under our current system, the first past the post system, it's actually rather difficult for third parties, but mine is very well organised at a grassroots level in parts of the country. I think the recent polls are suggesting that we could get around 30 seats. It may be a few more, a few less. But that order of magnitude, and that may prove to be a crucial number. But you also have to take into account the nationalists, particularly in Scotland, probably around 50 seats. So when you talk about little parties, we're talking about people in rather different situations. There's the Scottish nationalists, as in many parts of England, and then you have UKIP, or whatever version of UKIP is going to stand, which probably won't win seats, but as Anne suggested, can significantly affect the outcome.
Indeed so. I mean, this is the huge issue. In terms of the future, Vince Cable, you told Gloria De Piero on her programme Gloria Meets, which aired earlier today, that the price of support from the Lib Dems in a hung parliament would be progress on the passing of proportional representation in this country as our electoral system.
I'm sure it would be. I mean, we didn't push this very aggressively in 2010. We got a rather weak understanding to have a referendum, a modest change in the system subject to a referendum. It wasn't a very good outcome. I think this time round, if we were in that position again, it would be to have a electoral reform. The Labour Party has already agreed in principle to do this without a referendum. It would be in their manifesto. And I think it would depend, whether the whether they need us sufficiently to make that kind of concession. But I think there's a good possibility for the first time for many, many years this could be on the agenda. If you remember, Tony Blair was going to do this, but he had such an enormous majority, he didn't feel it was necessary, and so we got other constitutional changes, but not this. But next time round, it may well happen.
The likes, Anne, of Nigel Farage of this parish have spoken quite warmly about proportional representation. It would be good news for those on the right, such as yourself, who feel politically homeless.
No, it wouldn't. It would be appalling news. If you have proper proportional representation, then you're very unlikely ever to have an outright Conservative government again. Very unlikely. What you get with proportional representation is generally the outcome is a coalition. You get coalitions. Now, one of the litmus tests of democracy, and by the way, the reason I haven't joined the Reform Party and never did is precisely because of this issue. It believes in proportional representation, and I don't. But what I was saying was a litmus test of democracy is whether you can dismiss an unsatisfactory government on a convincing scale. And that is what happened to Labour in 79, to the Tories in 97. The public said, enough. You try doing that with proportional representation. And the other thing, and it's a subsidiary issue, but nevertheless it's there, is that I believe very strongly one member, one seat. So there's no doubt at all about who represents a constituency when there's a big problem.
You're shaking your head, Sir Vince.
Yes, there are models of electoral reform which deal with both of Anne's concerns. Something like the German system, which is a constituency base but with additional members, still has, local members of parliament, and it also has changes of government. We had one a few months ago, and the Christian Democrats left office, and the Social Democrats and their coalition partners came in. So you can have renewal through that system. The same happens in Ireland, which is a much more proportional system. There are good models and less good models, and when Tony Blair set up an investigation under Roy Jenkins as to what would be the optimal system in the UK, we opted for something a bit like the German or possibly the Scottish system, which does allow for change and does have local representation.
Yes, we just lost the line to Anne, but we'll get it back. What do you feel about the progress of the Lib Dems at the moment, Sir Vince? Do you think that they will be a force to be reckoned with in 2 years' time?
I think so, yes. We've had very good progress in by-elections, and I think more important in building up the local government base, which used to be extremely strong, and has certainly now recovered in what you could call Tory-facing areas, less so in the Labour-run big cities, which we used to run, the Newcastle, Sheffield, Liverpool, and the rest of them. But no, the base is recovering. There is a very professional targeting at resources to seats that we can win with the help of tactical voting. And I think we will come back as a much stronger force. I would like to see a stronger national message. That isn't clear at the moment, particularly support for Europe. No, obviously different from you, but that's how I would like us to be positioned. And probably highlighting one or two key areas like additional tax-raised revenue for education. I would have thought with a couple of big national themes of that kind, we would be in a much stronger position.
Briefly, Anne, the clock's against us. I don't want to get in trouble with Holly. There is a concern for Conservatives at the next election that the red wall goes back to Labour and that chunks of the blue wall go to the Lib Dems.
As I say, there are 2 years to go, but what I would say to Vince Cable is this: yes, please run in the general election on the basis of going back into Europe. Please do. That will guarantee you won't get anywhere at all. Please do. Please do. I'd love you to do that.
There we are. Vince Cable challenges that position. He's not talking about reversing Brexit, although many might not like the language deployed.
What's he talking about?
There we are. Well, look, Anne,
we're talking about
closer to Europe. That's what he's talking about, undermining Brexit. That's what he's talking about.
The issue of rejoining is an issue for decades ahead. It's not on the agenda.
OK, decades ahead, but still on the cards. May I It's all kicked off between two political legends. My thanks to Anne Widdecombe and Sir Vince Cable. Brilliant to have both of you on the show. We asked you on Twitter, could smaller parties decide the next election? Almost 70% said yes, 30.4% said no.